The best-selling nonfiction work, The Nazi Conspiracy by Brad Meltzer and Josh Mensch, has been adapted for middle-grade readers. The book recounts the little-known conspiracy to assassinate Franklin D. Roosevelt, Joseph Stalin, and Winston Churchill during World War II. Hi, I'm Dan Skinner, and welcome to the Kids Bookshelf. Brad Meltzer is the Emmy-nominated #1 New York Times best-selling author of The Lightning Rod, The Escape Artist, and over 10 other best-selling thrillers, as well as the Ordinary People Change the World series. He's also the host of 2 shows on the History Channel, and he joins us to talk about the Nazi conspiracy. Brad, welcome to the Kids Bookshelf.
So good to be here, my friend.
Well, this is a fascinating story from World War II history. How did you and your co-author learn about this conspiracy?
Yeah, so my buddy Josh mentioned I wrote this book together, but I found the story. I'm just such a history nerd that I found the story, and I said a secret plot to kill FDR, Stalin, and Churchill at the height of World War II, and I'd never heard of that story. And I said to Josh, "You know the story?" And when we get that, Josh and I, we literally take it and we divide and conquer, and we just start digging around in it. And what we found was one of the wildest Nazi stories that neither of us had ever heard of, but arguably could have changed the course of all of history. And we were like, we need to tell this story. And so that's where the book came from.
Well, there's so much information here that obviously we can't talk about everything, but can you give us a brief overview of what readers are going to find here?
Yeah, so let's just paint the picture. This is in 1943. Stalin wants the Allies to invade continental Europe because he was getting blitzed. The Nazis had invaded the Soviet Union and it was decimating. So we start helping them with armaments, but he wants us to attack from the West, of course, as we know, and eventually becomes the invasion of Normandy. But as 1943 arrives, the big three need to get on the same page. So FDR and Stalin and Churchill need to get together, talk about logistics and troop numbers, and they need to meet in person. And the stakes couldn't be higher. This is the first meeting of the big three. The summit must happen. And FDR is the middleman because Churchill and Stalin hate each other. So as 1943 is happening, FDR goes to Tehran, Iran, which is where this meeting is going to take place. His motorcade is coming down the center of the city, and everyone is waving. They're so excited to see that the president of the United States has come all the way over here. And in the car, someone's waving back, but what no one knows is that is not FDR in the car. It's a Secret Service decoy. The real FDR is ducked down and hiding in the back of a beat-up sedan because they're worried. He's racing through the side streets, and they're worried that there's a Nazi assassin who's about to murder him. And I just ruined chapter 1 of the Nazi conspiracy, but that's chapter 1. And again, it is one of the most amazing stories I've ever heard about World War II. And we now got to adapt it for kids so people can read the Nazi conspiracy, the young reader's version.
So what was the challenge here of taking a book that was written for adults and writing it in terms that might be more appealing for a younger reader?
Yeah, it's funny. The great Elmore Leonard said that when you want to write a good book, you got to leave out the parts that everyone skips. And so it's the same as whether you're writing for adults or for kids. So when we adapted this for kids, we had to get rid of the parts that kids are going to skip and that may be inappropriate for them, but leave those parts they're going to love. And one of my son's favorite parts in the whole book, and this is my own kid, there's a guy named Otto Skorzeny, because you know FDR, you know Hitler, you know Stalin, you know Churchill, you know those names, but there's a Nazi in the book named Otto Skorzeny. And what happens is he's a military fighter. Adolf Hitler brings his top military fighters to his wolf's lair, to his secret lair. He lines them up shoulder to shoulder in this big room. And Adolf Hitler gives him a quiz. He says, "What do you think of Italy?" And all the Nazis in the room are like, "Oh, boss, we stand strong with Italy. We're fighting on our side. They're on our team. We're going to crush, the Allied forces with them." And one Nazi voice speaks up and says, "I am from Austria, my Fuhrer." It's Otto Skorzeny, who's gambling in that moment because he knows that Adolf Hitler is also from Austria. And a true Austrian actually hates Italy because in the First World War, Italy took a key piece of Austria and never gave it back. And in that moment, Adolf Hitler looks at Otto Skorzeny and he says, "You're my guy. You're my guy." And he sends him on this Nazi mission that is so crazy that we actually had I asked that a picture of the moment be put in the book, because I'm like, my son will not believe it unless he sees proof of it right there. And again, it's the craziest Nazi story you've never heard in your life. But that's one of those stories that we were like, okay, this has to go in the young reader's version. And we're going to put a photo in there so kids know it's true. But all we're doing is just trying to tell the best story we can and make sure that kids are going to love it.
And it is a fascinating story. I'm wondering, again, it's not a spoiler because we know it didn't happen, but how close did they come? How good was their operation that they almost pulled it off?
Yeah, it's so good that when they tell FDR at the time, listen, don't say anything. Don't tell anyone this happened. They wanted the Secret Service wanted a secret. And FDR gets back from the meeting with the big three, and he has this big press conference on the White House lawn, and he says, "Yeah, the Nazis tried to kill me." And the like, Secret Service is like, "Oh my gosh," he told everyone, and it's huge. It's a huge story, and you're asking yourself now, well, why didn't I ever hear this story? And here's why: because soon after it happened, the invasion of Normandy happened. And then those stories became the biggest stories in the world. And this story in the Nazi conspiracy became a footnote. So we'll never know what happened because the plot was foiled. But if it would have happened at the height of where it happened, does Normandy happen again? I don't know. Does someone else step up who's better than FDR, worse than FDR? Does the whole course of the war change? We'll never know. But arguably, everything shifts in a terrible way if this Nazi plot goes through. It's at a precarious point where, for the very first time, the big three are meeting, and I can't even think of what would happen and how history would change if this plot actually went through with it.
Yeah, if all three of those world leaders were killed at once, it would destabilize all these enemies of the Nazis and clearly give them an
And not only
advantage.
that, and the thing that, and you're right, and here's why: is back then, today we look at our own news, we agree with our own news because it's our own news. But back then, when something was in the paper, the perception was the reality. There's a reason why when FDR and Winston Churchill met for the first time, they put a big picture of them in the newspaper. It's just a photo of their one meeting. And all across the world, they were like, Britain and the United States stand strong together. And that was the reality, whether it was true or not, whether we understood each other or not, whether it was just a one-day meeting and a photo op. But that was the reality. You couldn't argue with it. So putting those big three together, if they were murdered in front of everyone, it was a key moment where, at that moment, the Nazis, it could have changed the entire momentum of the war, given them all the energy they needed. They were obviously on the downslide, and it could have given them the morale boost that they needed to win the war. And that's what's so frightening about it.
Now, you talk about how you discovered this story later in life yourself. I'm curious, why was it important to you to introduce this story and make children in that middle grade age range aware of this moment in history?
I'm so glad you asked that. So, if you look right now, anti Semitism and hate for Jewish people is at an all-time high. It's disgusting to me. Why are we still fighting those Nazi ideals in 2025? And the reason is a recipe for authoritarians. You see it over and over again. You get this charismatic leader like Adolf Hitler, and he sees these white native born Germans who are suffering economically. And then he says those words that we see repeated throughout history. Those people are the cause of your pain. That's a code word, those people. In Adolf Hitler's time, of course, he's talking about the Jewish people. But we've seen it done about the Black community, about the immigrant community. There's always those people who are the reason that everything's bad. And to me, the American dream is not about making money. The American dream, in my humble opinion, is that when you see someone being picked on, when you see someone being bullied, you stand up and you use your voice and you say, enough, enough already. And to me, that's what the Nazi conspiracy is about. Yes, it's an amazing story about World War II, but it's a way to teach your kids to fight back against bullies and say enough. And man, do we need that lesson more than ever. We're divided as a culture right now. We're divided as a country right now. But there's a reason why the media, there's a reason why cable news, there's a reason why social media, and there's a reason why our politicians want us angry, because angry people vote. Angry people scroll on their phones. Angry people watch cable news. It's their benefit. But we have to be better than what angers us and stand up against venomous hatred like that, stand up against anti Semitism and fight back. That's what the Nazi Conspiracy is a book to me, really at its core, is all about teaching your kids that.
The history of World War II has been popular for ever since the war, basically. But it's also increasingly popular, I understand, with young children, young readers like you're trying to reach here. Why do you think that is?
I think it's because it's one of the few times where you know who the good guys and bad guys are so clearly. Look around where the culture is now. Whatever side of politics you're on, you can find someone on the other side, probably even in your own family, who are telling you, no, that's not true. Or that, yeah, we argue about all facts. We argue about gravity at this point. But in World War II, the Nazis are the bad guys, and America is united, and we stand together. And no matter what your politics are, no matter where you are in the spectrum of politics, we all believe one thing: Adolf Hitler is doing the wrong thing, and we got to fight him. And I think for kids especially, it's a relief almost to see America stand together, stand strong, and fight the bad guy. It's one of the only times in world history where we stand strong against something, we fight the bad guy, we win, right? It's an amazing moment that I think, especially for kids, it's such a rarity now to watch an idea of a united America fighting against the bad guys that we all agree on, and we actually are the good guys in the story and win and do the right thing. That's a tantalizing story for adults, and you better believe it's a tantalizing story for kids.
And this is something that you've done in your other book series, too. I'm going to get the title wrong, but it's basically about people who changed history, who made big impacts in history. You want kids to be aware of those, too, because, as you pointed out, they need to know that there are good things out there and that you can make a difference in the world.
Yeah, you're talking about our Ordinary People Change the World series, the I Am series. We've done I Am Abraham Lincoln, and I Am Amelia Earhart, I Am Rosa Parks, and I Am Martin Luther King Jr. Our newest book out now is I Am Simone Biles, which is, the story of the great Olympic gymnast. But it's not about her winning a gymnastics tournament. It's about her battles with mental health. I have 3 kids right now. And if you're a kid today, anyone who has kids knows they're struggling with anxiety, they're struggling with mental health. Social media is ripping apart their self-esteem. And I love the fact that I can give them a hero like Simone Biles or like Abraham Lincoln, who, yes, has problems. It's not all perfect. It's hard. It's difficult. But they rise up above their fears and they do what's right. And in Simone Biles' case, right, everyone says, oh, she's a loser. She quit. She's a quitter. She's the worst. But she stands strong, holds herself up, goes and competes and wins that gold medal. And I love the fact that I can show my kids it's okay to have that moment of weakness. It's like the great saying is, fall down 8 times, but get up 9. And I want my daughter to have that lesson. I want my sons to have that lesson. That's why I write I Am Simone Biles. That's why I write I Am Abraham Lincoln. And you better believe that's why I write The Nazi Conspiracy.
Since you write for many different age groups, what do you think is kind of the common theme or the common reason behind you wanting to share history and your take on, what we can take away from history, the lessons of history that still are applicable to today?
Yeah, all the books I write, whether it's my kids' books, whether it's my adult books, whether it's a new thriller that's coming in January, they all have one thing in common: my core belief. I believe ordinary people change the world. I don't care where you went to school. I don't care how much money you make. That's nonsense to me. I believe in regular people and their ability to affect change in this world. And it's why I believe in every hero we talked about today, whether it's Abraham Lincoln, whether it's Simone Biles, whether it's FDR and Winston Churchill. And to me, when you look at the Nazi conspiracy, one of the things we found in there is, again, why we fight an anti-Semitism in 2025, because the Nazis never left. We're still around fighting them. In fact, when you look back at World War II, we always think of, the Nazis as being somewhere in Europe, somewhere abroad. But we found in World War II, there was a Nazi rally in Madison Square Garden in New York City, 20,000 people cheering for the Nazis. There was a big swastika up there and a giant picture of George Washington. The first speaker at the rally said if George Washington were alive today, he'd be friends with Adolf Hitler. And this happened here on US soil. So why are we fighting anti-Semitism now? Because it never went away. And that's why we tell these stories. That's why what all these stories have in common is to show people just how much history affects them at every level.
I need to come back briefly to something you just teased us with, and that's a new thriller coming out. What can you tell us about it?
Yeah, The Viper. I love it. We should talk in January about it. But it's my first thriller in 4 years, and I'll just say, don't turn your back on The Viper. I can't wait for people to read this book. It's been a busy year for us, right? We get to do the Nazi conspiracy, we get to do I'm Simone Biles, and we get to do The Viper in the span of a 3-month period. And each one is kind of a different age range, but they all scratch a different part of my brain, and it's telling these stories of these unsung people that you've never heard of. But make no mistake, they changed the world, right? There's a guy in the Nazi conspiracy named Mike Riley. You've never heard of. I had never heard of. He's the head of the Secret Service in World War II. The guy who keeps FDR alive. In fact, he physically picks FDR up and carries him when he can't roll him in a wheelchair, picks him in his arms. He's so big, and carries the president of the United States in his arms. And he's the guy who assesses this threat that the Nazis have to kill his boss. He's the one who says, "Boss, I think it's real." He's one of the people who obviously is in that threat assessment, moves FDR to a new place, and arguably in that and in many other things, there's a lot of other people involved, saves FDR's life that day. And we've never heard of him, but it's time to tell those stories. History is not made by just the people with bold, big names that are famous. It's made by people you've never heard of. And to me, that's a beautiful lesson that you can give to your kids. It's certainly a lesson I give to my sons and a lesson I give to my daughter, is to remind them of their own power by showing them the power of all the ordinary people through history who have changed it and left it a completely different world.
This nonfiction book is The Nazi Conspiracy, The Secret Plot to Kill Roosevelt, Stalin, and Churchill by Brad Meltzer and Josh Mensch. If you'd like to purchase The Nazi Conspiracy, I've placed a link for you in the description below. If you appreciated this conversation, please subscribe, like, and click on the bell so you know when I post new interviews. Meanwhile, here are 2 more books you might find interesting. Well, thank you for watching this edition of the Kids Bookshelf. I'm Dan Skinner. Until next time, keep sharing the gift of reading.